Совета, вы, Николай Александрович, и ваша семья приговорены к смерти и сейчас будете расстреляны.
Что? Что вы сказали? Повторите. Господи, прости их, не ведают, что творят.
Hello guys. Hope that intro got big with the video content if the title wasn't enough. Anyway, today, the death of the Romanovs turns 106 years old. In this video, we will be looking at the events that led up to the execution that happened 106 years before this video will be released. Here we go. We will begin in 1868 with the birth of Tsar Nicholas II. His grandfather, Tsar Alexander II, was still ruling the country at the time. During this time before becoming Tsar, he wasn't given much information on how to become Tsar, or basically just how to rule as Tsar. Nothing from his grandfather, and then nothing from his father, Tsar Alexander III. When he would finally be given the chance to learn from his father would suddenly die of kidney inflammation, leaving Tsar Nicholas to become the next Tsar without knowing how. He even admitted himself that he wasn't ready to become Tsar, but it was already too late. Not long after taking the role of Tsar, he would basically try offering food and celebration to people in Moscow. This ultimately backfired, causing what is known as the Kadinka tragedy, where hundreds died from the crowd. This automatically put a damp on Tsar Nicholas's image, and it did not help that he continued to wane from various other things he did, which were basically ignoring the populace of over 100 million people in favor of making his own royal life better. This would continue for the next decade until By around 1904, there were some disagreements between the Russian Empire and Japan over Korea and Manchuria, specifically Port Arthur. During these disagreements, Japan would attempt to make a compromise. They would get Korea, while Russia would keep Manchuria and Port Arthur. Tsar Nicholas decided to decline this offer and instead push for Korea to be divided north and south between Russia and Japan. This predicted something. Japan declined this, sparking the Russo-Japanese War. The reason why this war happened was not only because of this disagreement, but also because of imperialism. Tsar Nicholas wanted a more secure control over the far east of Russia in East Asia, which they would already begin to achieve a few decades ago going up to this point, where they weakened the declining Qing dynasty for more land and control. Also, Tsar Nicholas thought that considering that Japan is weak, according to him, he could easily win this war and gain back the respect of the people. Now, to be fair, Russia had an absolutely huge force of men in the army. However, this was basically just a massive barrier you could easily break through, as Japan had been rapidly industrializing since opening up to the world and was nearly on par with the greats of Europe. That power would, let's just say, be demonstrated in the war. In the end, Russia would make a massive loss to Japan, losing its control over the Qing dynasty and also showing two things. One, that Japan was strong enough to defeat a Russian power, and two, that Russia was very crippled. Tsar Nicholas's plans obviously never came to fruition, and it became clear that Russia needed to industrialize. It would actually begin industrializing before this war, but it was slow and way too late compared to other European powers, and even Japan. However, even after all of this, the worst has long yet to come. Before I start talking about the events of this year, I would like to mention that the year before, 1904, was when Tsarevich Alexei was born. Until this point, all Tsar Nicholas's children were female, and Russian law prevents females from inheriting the throne. Now, you might initially think, a male was born. That means problem solved, right? Wrong. While he was born with type B hemophilia, which meant that if he suffered an injury, his blood cannot properly clot to prevent excessive bleeding, which obviously means that excessive bleeding is going to happen to him. Self-explanatory. And it did. He nearly died from this hemophilia until someone came to save him. But we're not there yet. Anyways, 1905. Firstly, the outcome of the Russo-Japanese War would happen, which I have already explained. Also, in January of 1905 was when gunshots fired. You see, one day, a priest and his followers would march up to the Winter Palace peacefully, in a hope of getting better lives. However, Tsar Nicholas was not at the Winter Palace at this certain time, so they were met with guards, who shot the peaceful marchers. This event commonly goes down as Bloody Sunday. Even though Tsar Nicholas did not order the guards to fire, he was still blamed for the act, being the absolute monarch. Then after that, the events of Tsar Nicholas continued to build and build until the 1905 Russian Revolution. The 1905 Russian Revolution was a long time coming and involved worker strikes, and also the communists attempting to rise up, specifically Vladimir Lenin and his followers. Basically Marxists. Conflicts would happen through 1905 until suddenly, Tsar Nicholas and his military won and defeated the rebels. However, there were some reforms, like the country becoming more of a constitutional monarchy with the establishment of the Duma, Russia's form of parliament. At least this was the case until Tsar Nicholas decided to suddenly strip power away from the Duma and give himself absolute power once again. This will all go well, right? Right? Surprisingly enough, for the next period of time, at least compared to what happened before and what will happen soon, this period of time was quite uneventful and peaceful. The Russian Empire was actually going through growth, the lives of the people were getting better. And this was because of some reforms that were made in the country, improving most aspects of life. Reforms had not really been made since the time of Tsar Alexander II, who was previously mentioned as Tsar Nicholas's grandfather. This was when suddenly, Tsar Nicholas II would bring in Rasputin. Rasputin was a supposed wizard who could heal people, and the Romanov family took a massive interest in him. Also, remember when I said someone helped Tsarevich Alexei? Well, it was Rasputin who helped Alexei. He did this by taking him off of his aspirin, which actually helped him massively improve. Why? This is because aspirin is a blood thinner and makes hemophilia worse. This act, along with the fact that he did other various things, allowed the royal family to love him. However, this would anger the 100 million strong populace of Russia, as they thought Rasputin was controlling and manipulating the Romanov family. This further put disdain on Tsar Nicholas for allowing a practical homeless man to live in the Winter Palace. We have all this hate building on the Tsar. How could this break? Oh no. Anyway, yeah. A driver would take a wrong turn and get Franz Ferdinand assassinated. This would spark World War I. Russia would join to defend Serbia after Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. This would then provoke the German Empire, and you get the gist. Anyway, during World War I, Tsar Nicholas would randomly take the role of being general of the army, and he fricking sucked. He got millions of Russian troops killed, and he also left the Winter Palace with his German wife, and also the previously mentioned Rasputin, who, may I remind you, does not have the best reputation with the Russian populace. Plus, later in the war, people in the country would begin to starve as supplies were getting cut off everywhere. From the blockade by the Ottoman Empire to a lot of farmers being enlisted into the army made it hard to come by food. Eventually, this would result in the February Revolution of 1917. Thousands of workers and citizens protested in Petrograd, also St. Petersburg, and the communists would begin to slowly rise again. Then, when Tsar Nicholas attempted to return to the Winter Palace, he could not because he was ambushed and then be forced at gunpoint to abdicate. So he did. He would pass the throne of Tsar to his brother, since Tsarevich Alexei was obviously not ready for the role. However, a day later, his brother would also abdicate, officially ending over 300 years of Romanov rule. Great! Tsar Nicholas and his family can be free now, right? You are greatly mistaken. Not long after abdication, Tsar Nicholas and his family would be placed on house arrest, as the provisional government from the Duma would take control of Russia. Initially, the family was able to continue their royal standards and high quality of life, but then once the communists or Bolsheviks began to take over in the October Revolution, the quality of life for the Romanovs severely deteriorated. Eventually, they would end up in a house arrest in the Ipatiev house, which was in a rural area in Central Asia. They would adapt to this lower quality of life, however, though I will not elaborate on how. Eventually, though, the communists were in a state of panic, as the White Army was getting closer and closer to the Ipatiev house and liberating the Romanov family. This would eventually lead to the events of July 17th, 1918. Early that day, the family was awakened and taken to a basement. Then, some drunken communist forces would kill them all and a massive amount of gunshots. This ended the bloodline for the direct Romanov descendants. After the execution, the bodies were hidden in the woods and their death was not mentioned at all for another decade. Even after their death was mentioned, their bodies were not discovered until much later into the 20th century, and even then, not all of the bodies were discovered, as 2 more bodies were discovered much later on. They weren't even buried together to this day. Also, before the discovery of the bodies, many imposters claiming to be the surviving Anastasia or Alexei would pop up, even getting a whole movie about an imposter in the late 1990s. Overall, the story of the Romanovs from 1868 to 1918 was a very depressing downfall that ultimately saw their execution 106 years before this video was created. The only real lesson that can be provided is just don't be a bad leader of a massive country. Anyways, without anything else to say, see y'all.